The Marriage Stone by Josephine Darcy. Chapter 69. Down This Road. Lucius, still standing on the main floor on the far side of the chamber, felt a strange pulse of magic move through the room as Potter joined him on the floor. A shiver of anticipation went through him, and he wondered if anyone else had felt the sensation. Certainly every eye in the room was riveted on the slender, green-eyed young man before them. Instead of a traditional robe, he was wearing a dark red surcoat, the color proclaiming his Gryffindor heritage. And despite the seriousness of the situation, Lucius could not help the way his eyes roamed over the young man's slender form. It was not the male shape that was so completely captivating him, but rather the power he could feel contained inside his form. How had Severus Snape, of all people, come to be in possession of such a creature? Lucius felt the envy stir inside him once again. Potter stared momentarily down at the floor, his head cocked to one side as if listening to something in the stillness, and then he raised his head and swept his gaze over the room, pausing on Diana Brand. "Lady Brand, do you want this position?" he asked quietly, surprising everyone. They had expected him to really confirm or deny the seats. Diana glanced briefly over at her husband, who was grinning in amusement at the turn of events. The almost fanatical devotion of the Winterlands to young Potter had become public knowledge over the last several months. "I have it on good authority that the Winterlands would be willing to renegotiate several trade agreements if I hold this seat," Diana informed him. Potter nodded his head, as if he had guessed her response. "Then the seat is yours," he said simply. Marlet leapt to his feet in outrage. Potter turned and pinned him with his gaze. From his position, Lucius could see that there was no anger in Potter's face, but rather a quiet curiosity. Marlet stared at the young man in shock, seemingly stunned to silence, despite the fact that no spell was uttered. A moment later, he sank back down into his seat without a protest. At this, Lucius felt a shiver of fear run down his spine. This was unexpected. Potter turned then toward Merrick Vulpine. At 80 years old, the silver-haired man was believed to be the oldest werewolf currently alive, and had made no secret of his condition. Despite his disease, he was remarkably hale-looking. "It's good to see you again, sir," Potter remarked, and Lucius frowned at the exchange. Vulpine was a recluse. As far as he knew, Potter would have had no opportunity to have met the man. A sudden thought occurred to him, and he frowned, re-evaluated the old man sitting before them. He'd seen the brief duel the man had engaged in yesterday. His opponent had been a rather vicious former Orber, who had made a career of hunting down various dark creatures. Vulpine had taken him out with a single curse. Was it possible that Vulpine had been one of the numerous wizards to have been called? If that were the case, Lucius was glad he had not thought to challenge him. "You as well," Vulpine returned Potter's greeting with a wolfish grin. "It is your intention that Remus Lupin hold this seat?" Potter asked. "It is." Vulpine nodded in agreement. At that, Potter turned toward a rather nervous-looking Remus Lupin. Lucius doubted he was the only one who saw the way Lupin's left hand twitched, as if he was having difficulty preventing himself from reaching out and taking hold of the hand of Sirius Black beside him. "It wasn't so long ago, Remus, that you were in this chamber defending your right to exist," Potter stated, and at his words several people shifted uncomfortably at the reminder. Indeed, Lucius did not think the reminder boded well for him at all. "A deed for the rights of all werewolves to exist. I think you more than anyone will agree that such a law must be changed." His words sparked a murmur of dissent which spread through the room, but Lucius noticed the approving grin on Dumbledore's face. "Werewolves," he thought with distaste. "What would be next? Mudblood—" Lucius cut off the thought. He supposed that if he was going to attempt to align himself with Potter, he would have to curb such thoughts. A misplaced word could cause great difficulty for him in the days ahead. "You could do a lot of good here, Remus," Potter continued. "Will you accept this position?" A number of emotions flicked across Lupin's face before he swallowed nervously and finally nodded his head. Black reached out then and grasped Lupin's hand in his own. Potter smiled faintly at that. Then it is yours, he confirmed, before turning his attention toward Valerian Ventus, who sat beside Vulpine. Ventus had been a Slytherin a year ahead of Lucius at Hogwarts. Lucius couldn't help but wonder how he had become an agent for a vampire lord. As far as he had known, the Ventus family had no ties with the vampire clans. Considering the laws against vampires, there were few Slytherins who would be willing to openly align themselves with one. You hold this seat for Lord Aventine? Potter asked, grinning as if fascinated by the events playing out before him. Ventus nodded. I do. Surprisingly, Potter stepped away from him, turning instead to face the cloaked and hooded figure seated in the back row of the viewing gallery. At his actions, the stranger raised his hands and pushed back the hood of his cloak, revealing dark hair, a pale but handsome face, and the red eyes of a vampire. At the sight, shouts of alarm echoed through the room, and a dozen wands were drawn, mirroring the events of a few weeks ago when Remus Lupin had transformed in front of everyone. This time it was Potter's shout of "No!" that stayed their hands. Aventine never flinched, his glowing gaze remaining fixed on Potter. Put your wands away! Potter ordered into the panicked silence that fell over the room. He turned his head and directed his words specifically to Darmot. Lucius noticed Stark and several other Aurors in the viewing gallery watching the exchange uncertainly. Darmot's face hardened as Potter held his gaze, but after a long, tense movement, he lowered his wand, slipping the wand back into his holster. He nodded for his men to do the same. For the moment, peace returned, and Potter turned his attention back to the vampire waiting for him. When I heard your name, I thought it might have been you I met the other night, Potter said to the vampire, and Lucius felt the bitter tightening of his jaw. Aventine, like Vulpine, had also been called. Two dark creatures. And unlike him, they had been free to answer the call. How did he come to this place pushed aside by the impure? I thought perhaps the time for neutrality had passed, Aventine remarked, and his words caused nervous reactions throughout the room. Neutrality, Lucius wondered. What did he mean? I said to you the other night that I would ask nothing of you that you would not freely give, Potter told him, and I will stand by that. But today it is you making the request. I confess I know little about the laws governing vampires, but if they are anything like the laws governing werewolves, I cannot imagine that you or your people have been kindly treated by the wizarding world, or that you hold us in any affection. Any exchange between us would require a great leap of faith. What is it you want? Potter's words alarmed many people in the room, but Lucius could clearly see the spark of amusement in Aventine's eyes. He seemed pleased by Potter's words. 400 years ago, there was a man named Severus Ventus. He was a potions master from a prominent Slytherin family and a known parselmouth. He had made a number of research breakthroughs in potions that could potentially aid my people. But when the laws against vampires were passed, his research was abandoned. His notes were taken by the Potion Makers Guild and locked away. It has taken me years, but I have finally gotten my hands on those research notes. Unfortunately, they were all written in parcel tongue, and I cannot read them. I want those notes translated, and I want the Guild to continue the research. They could all hear the passion in Aventine's voice as he spoke, and Lucius found himself bewildered by it. He had always been led to believe that vampires reveled in their curse. Why would they seek so desperately for a cure? According to the ministry books, vampires were little more than mindless creatures who sought to spread their infection to the rest of the world. There is another who can translate those notes, Potter reminded the vampire, and though he did not speak the Dark Lord's name, his words sent a shudder of awareness through the room. Aventine smiled faintly at that, his eyes flashing. I do not trust the other, he said simply, and though he said no more, they all understood the implication behind his words. Potter glanced over his shoulder at Severus Snape, his green eyes holding some silent question. Severus inclined his head once in agreement, and Potter smiled, turning back toward Aventine. I will translate the notes for you, he stated, and while I do not speak for the guild, I can promise you that at least one world-renowned potion master will continue your research. In exchange for this seat? Aberdeen asked curiously, sparing Severus a brief glance. His eyes flicked toward Lupin. No doubt he was aware of who had cured the man of his lycanthropy. Potter cracked his head at that. No, he said, surprising them all. You will have the translation and the research, regardless of what is decided here today. As for the seat, it is yours, provided you can deal fairly with the ministry despite the injustice they have dealt to your people. It is my hope that, like Remus Lupin and Merrick Vulpine, you intend to seek equality for your people. That is my hope, Aventine agreed, and they could all see the look of quiet amazement in his burning eyes as he stared down at the young man before him. And what if I told you that though he does not know it yet, I intend to have Lucius Malfoy become a champion for your cause? Harry asked, and his words caused a stir of shock to move through the room. Lucius stared at the young man in disbelief. What in Merlin's name what is he talking about? He found himself turning to look at Severus for an explanation, only to find that the dark-eyed man looked just as bewildered. Indeed, the looks of shock on Lupin's and Black's faces were almost comical. Aventine, however, smiled in mirth. I would say that I am aware of Lord Malfoy's skill and abilities, and would count myself well served. Then the seat is yours, Potter replied, though he glanced at Albus for confirmation. Does holding a position on the Wizengamot give him full citizenship rights, or will we need to deal with that as well? Dumbledore, who seemed less shocked and more amazed by the proceedings, just nodded his head. As a member of the Wizengamot, his rights are assured, he told him, and Potter smiled in acceptance. Potter turned then toward Lucius, and as those green eyes studied his face, Lucius felt a sense of panic well up in his heart. For the first time today, he wondered if he had badly miscalculated by coming here. But no, perhaps there was still a chance to salvage this day. If Potter wanted him to promise to champion the cause of vampires and werewolves and puppies, who was he to protest? Merlin knew he was an expert at promising things he did not mean. And yet, Severus would have warned him of this. Why would Potter take such a chance? Why would he even think to give him this opportunity after all the things he had done to him and his family? Had he done something to sway him? Did he hold some previously unknown fascination or attraction over Potter that he had been unaware of? If the look of anger on Severus's face was any indication, it was possible that he did. He wondered suddenly if he might be able to manipulate things in such a way as to gain even more than the seat of the Wizengamot he desired. Well, Mr. Malfoy, Potter said suddenly, it would seem you have a decision to make. A decision? The boy was offering a deal. Why in Merlin's name would he trust him with such a thing? It made no sense. And yet Lucius was not one to ignore a golden opportunity. If no one was going to speak out and warn the boy, he certainly wasn't going to refuse. He was careful about choosing his next words. Vague promises were always the best ones. You wish me to aid Lord Aventine in exchange? No, Mr. Malfoy. Potter cut him off before he could continue. There is no deal laid before you. There is no exchange being offered. A seat for a favor. Lucius frowned. Had he misread the situation? I don't understand. Surely it was a bargain Potter was after. Potter gazed in silence at him for a long moment, and he grew uncomfortable under that stare, as if he were being sized up in a way he had never experienced before. There is a path before you, Mr. Malfoy, he said, and his voice held a strange certainty. It has appeared before you before, several times, but you have never set foot upon it. It is here before you once more. One last time. It will not appear again. Potter crossed the room as he spoke, pausing to stand in the center of the chamber. Lucius shivered as he listened, watching him in utter disbelief. What in Merlin's name was he talking about? A tendril of fear crept up his spine and into his heart. Why did those words sound so ominous, so final? Across the room, he could see Severus, Lupin, and Black staring hard at Potter, as if trying to warn him without words not to continue. A path. Lucius asked in bewilderment. If the young man wanted him to promise something in exchange, fine, but he needed to know what it was he was promising. How else was he to work this to his advantage? He didn't know what to do with riddles. I know why you are here, Mr. Malfoy, Potter told him, and for a moment Lucius felt as if he'd been stripped bare, as if the dark mark upon his arm was visible for all to see. I know what you want, and it is not power, prestige, or ancient magics, no matter what lies you tell yourself. The fear in Lucius's heart grew, overwhelming him. Could the young man read his mind? How had he known the very thoughts that consumed him? Despite all his training and the years spent in mastering himself, he found himself involuntarily taking a step back. If you go seeking elsewhere for what you want, you will find nothing, Potter told him, and Lucius was no longer able to look away from those green eyes that burned him. And though Potter was gazing straight at him, he was no longer certain if the young man was truly seeing him. There was a power in his voice that permeated the room. It warmed the air, made it feel alive. I know what you want, Mr. Malfoy. I can see it. There before you, it lies down this path. But I must warn you, if you set foot upon this road, you will never step off of it. It will change you. It will hold you. And you will never go back to what you knew before. They were all staring at him now, every man and woman in the room speechless, as if they were listening to the voice of destiny. And perhaps they were, for Lucius could not ever remember feeling so alone in his life. Every plot, every manipulation, every lie he held in his mind abandoned him, leaving his mind empty, quiet, like the darkness waiting for the first ray of daylight. Potter let out a soft breath and bowed his head before glancing up at Dumbledore. The old wizard had removed his glasses and was staring at the young man with a look of amazement, as if he'd never seen him before. Whatever it was the young man was seeking in his old mentor, he did not seem to find it, for he sighed and turned away, his gaze once again turning toward Lucius. There is your seat, Mr. Malfoy, he said, raising his hand and pointing to one of the empty chairs beside Madame Bones. Take it or leave. I will not make this decision for you. Mind still blank, numb, Lucius found himself looking around at the others, seeking answers on their faces. Most of the men and women in the room were staring at Potter in confused silence, most seeming stunned. For though Potter was no longer speaking, they could all still feel his words vibrating in the air. Severus, Lupin, and Black were glaring at Lucius, staring hard at him as if willing him to turn away, willing him to leave their presence. And Dumbledore, his old headmaster, was staring at him with a look of astonishment that was warring with equal parts disbelief. It occurred to Lucius in that instant that they did not want him to do this thing. Whatever this task Potter had laid before him, they did not want him to do it. They did not believe him capable of doing it. And he felt a momentary surge of such rage inside him that he thought for a moment that he was trapped back in that awful instant when he'd realized he could not answer the call. He could kill them all, and prove to the wizarding world once and for all that Lucius Malfoy did not need anyone! If you go seeking elsewhere for what you want, you will find nothing. Potter's words echoed through his mind. Nothing. Had he meant that literally? That there was nothing else for him? That if he walked out that door, there would be nothing beyond? Is this all that awaited him? To join these disbelievers who would vilify him? Or nothing? But no, Potter had said he could see what he wanted. Could see it there before him, and staring into those burning green eyes, Lucius could believe it utterly. He had no idea what it was Potter saw. He had no idea what it was that he apparently wanted. How had he come to this, to not even know his own mind, his own desires? But Potter knew, and had shown him the path he needed to walk to find it. Though every other gaze in the room glared at him, there was no censure in Potter's eyes, despite the fact that he had given him every cause in the world to hate him. Potter knew and was giving him a chance. One last chance. It is here before you once more. one last time. It will not appear again. Whatever this was, this chance, this path, this quest, it had nothing to do with the others in the room. Lucius could not allow them to make the decision for him. He had come here to play his usual games, to pull the strings of the puppets around him, and had instead found himself in a foreign place, standing utterly alone before a dark-haired, green-eyed king, who asked the impossible of him. He took a step forward, and then another, and another, mounting the stairs and stepping onto the high gallery platform. A leap of faith, he thought. It would change him. It would hold him. He did not know how, but he believed Potter was correct. He would not go back to what he knew before. Reaching the chair beside Madame Bones, he sat down, raising his head proudly, and meeting the emerald gaze that had just ripped something open inside him. "Welcome, Lord Malfoy," the boy said kindly, and smiling, Lucius inclined his head to his king.